Welcome to the Legal Hodgepodge podcast, where we talk a whole lot about immigration and bankruptcy and a little bit about everything else. I am your host, immigration and bankruptcy attorney, Evelyn Pabon Figueroa. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, I do want to remind you that the information that I provide here does not constitute legal advice, and it is only meant for informational purposes. On this week's episode, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and tell you a little bit about what the Legal Hodgepodge podcast is going to be and what you can expect. As I mentioned earlier, I am an immigration and bankruptcy attorney. I know that this is not the normal combination. A lot of times you see attorneys that practice family law and criminal law, or attorneys that practice criminal law and immigration, or family and immigration, but you rarely see attorneys that practice both bankruptcy and immigration. Now, the reason I practice in both of these areas is quite simple. I enjoy both of these areas. I first came into contact into the immigration law area when I was still in law school. I took a course and I just fell in love with it. And it helped me understand what people that are trying to come to the U.S. have to go through in order to be able to be here either for an extended temporary period or to make the U.S. their home. It also made me realize that a lot of times when I heard things in the news about immigration, they weren't quite right. Growing up in Puerto Rico, you would hear a lot of news articles, a lot of reporting about people from our sister island, the Dominican Republic, that would come into Puerto Rico. And it seemed to me like they didn't really explain what the entire process was. They just told us that these people were trying to come in the island, or that these people were living in Puerto Rico and they didn't have documents to live here. But you really didn't know why they didn't have documents. There were a lot of questions that weren't answered. And when I took this course, it really answered a lot of those questions. And it made me realize that there's a lot that we don't know. It also made me realize that I'm quite grateful that I didn't have to go through this process, because it can be a very lengthy process. It can be a very difficult process for a lot of people. And that's why I decided to practice immigration law, to help people go through that process. I've been practicing immigration since 2008. I do both employment-based and family-based cases, but I also represent people that are in immigration court. These are individuals that the government is trying to remove from the country, so I help them and I defend them and represent them through that process. My entry into bankruptcy was a little bit different. It was kind of by accident. So in the law firm that I work at, they have a bankruptcy department. And this was around 2009, where there was the whole housing market crisis. A lot of people were hurting financially. So a lot of people needed to resort to bankruptcy so that they can get a fresh start. And because there was a lot of demand at that time in that department, I stepped up to provide assistance in the department, and I enjoyed doing what I did. It allowed me to help people to get a fresh start. And I realized that this is something that both immigration law and bankruptcy have in common. They give you the opportunity to help people start over, either from a financial point of view or from a new country and a new home. And that's how I kind of make the connection between both of them. I am originally from Puerto Rico. I was born and raised there. I went to law school there. I am licensed to practice law in Puerto Rico, as well as licensed to practice law in Florida. I am not married and I do not have any children, but I do have several nieces and a nephew that I love as my own. And I've been living in the Central Florida area since 2005. Since then, this is what I've been calling home. The Legal Hodgepodge podcast. Well, the idea of this podcast is so that we can have a weekly conversation about immigration, about bankruptcy and about law in general and how it affects our lives, how it affects everyday people's lives. So I will bring you, in some episodes, I will talk about updates in the news, in the law. I will talk about newsworthy, law-related incidents. In other episodes, I will bring in guests and we will talk about their lives, their businesses, and how immigration, bankruptcy, or just law in general has affected their lives. I also want it to be fun, so sometimes I will also discuss books or movies or TV shows where they address either immigration, bankruptcy, or just law in general, and we will go over what they get right, what they get wrong, and what they get really, really wrong. That way, when you watch these episodes or you read these books, you know what Hollywood is showing and you know what real life is, so that you have that understanding. I hope that you will join me in this journey and that you will tune in every week and support our podcast. If you would like to reach out to me, either because you have a question or you have a topic that you want me to discuss, you can send me an email at pabonfigueroa@cplspa.com, or you can call me at 407-874-5490. Thank you, and I hope to see you next week.